Welcome, everybody, to the Healing Place podcast. I am your host, Teri Wellbrock. Excited to have with me today Jen Johnson. And I have to read only because my menopause brain, forgets these things. And I just said it like 2 seconds ago. Mindfulness teacher, coach, and licensed professional counselor. But then we just talked about, photographer and writer as well. So welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Teri. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. I'm just thrilled to have you here. I told you I was just stalking your website again. So, and wonderful, wonderful work that you're doing out there in the world. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I love it. I love everything that I do.
Yeah, I tell people I find it a soul calling because I own a business. That's my day job, pays the bills. But this work, the podcast and the blog and the newsletter and, the finishing up the book, that's just, and working with my therapy dog, Sammy, with kids. That's my soul work. That's my calling. So, yeah.
I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. So talk to us about, what your mission is and what it is you're doing.
Yeah, I have this really unique blend of work that I do that is about helping people heal through difficult times. And I try to work with people in a way that just really empowers us all to take responsibility for our own well-being. I think, when I was growing up, I had some struggles growing up with a mom who had addiction, and I really didn't grow up with that sense of agency that, that I could have an impact on how I felt every day. And, I woke up not very excited to my life for a lot of years in my younger years. And so I've created this work that is intended to empower people to know that we all have a sense of agency in impacting our wellness, no matter, if we're struggling with illness or mental illness or soul illness, there are things that we can do to feel better. And so I teach mindfulness meditation and yoga, and I also bring in writing for healing, photography for healing, and teach people how to connect deeply with nature. And those are the things that have gotten me through difficult times. And those are the things that I found that have been most impactful with the clients that I serve.
Yeah, beautiful. Woman after my own heart, because all of those things, mindfulness. Oh, when I discovered mindfulness in my process, I did EMDR therapy for 4 years to begin my healing journey. And then, but also filled my toolbox, as I like to call it, with all these wonderful in yoga and meditation and nature are all part of that. But mindfulness, I think, is my favorite go-to if I feel my anxiety starting to, my symptoms of PTSD. I used to have severe panic attacks, no longer, yay. But I can still, I'm so aware of my body now and in touch with it that I can feel if my anxiety starts to heighten. I go to that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 mindfulness technique, find 5 things to look at, describe them to myself in great detail, and then kind of work through the senses. And being in nature is my favorite place to do it. We live near a nature center. So, I'll just go out. And someone told me recently, take a nature bath. And I loved that visual, just immersing ourselves into the like a bath of nature. So sounds and all that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. And the cool thing is, there are a lot of us, you included, I know from our previous conversation, who've been doing mindfulness for a long time. And the research is finally catching up with how impactful it is in terms of healing and recovery. And I love the way that you just described that, like, being in touch with your body and knowing when you leave. And the way I like to describe that is, I tell my clients, find your home base. And we can find our home base in that place of softness and peace. And a lot of us have never experienced that. I had never really consciously experienced that until I first practiced mindfulness meditation. And I think when we get in a habit of that regular practice and learn to sense in our bodies what it feels like to be in home base, then we can more easily recognize when we leave it. And that's why I think that regular practice is so important, because it brings us back to that sense that felt sense in the body of, oh, I'm back home, I'm back in the present moment, I'm in my body. And then when we leave, we start to go, oh, I've left, let me get back. How do I get back? And then having that strategy, like yours is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, having that strategy to bring ourselves back is really critical.
I love that concept of home base. That's very powerful only because, and I don't know if you and I talked about this when we spoke on the phone, but when I used to, be experiencing severe panic attacks, my therapist and others would say, breathe. And I struggled with breathing horribly because I was so terrified of being in my own body.
Right.
Like the sensations were overwhelming to me and so scary that breathing brought attention to me being in my body, which sounds very odd, but I didn't want to be in my body. I was more comfortable in this little dissociative kind of state of, no, that body's scary and has scary stuff going on in it. But when I learned mindfulness and started slowly acclimating myself to being comfortable in my body, then I was able to start utilizing breath work. And then I understood the concept of breath work. And how powerful that can be. But until I found mindfulness, so it was, again, kind of filling this toolbox up and finding what works for me. So, yeah.
And I think that's a common experience for so many people, and especially those of us who have experienced trauma and, especially early trauma, being in the body. Oftentimes the body was mistreated or abused or whatever. And so being in that does feel overwhelming. And for a lot of people, focusing attention on the breath, just that phrase, it just is so vague. And we're turning attention toward this process that's usually automatic. And so we're noticing it. And then there's this thought sometimes of, oh my gosh, what if it stops? And
right.
A lot of people just, experience anxiety with turning the attention toward the breath. And you mentioned a little earlier about sounds. And so for those who are who experience undue anxiety with turning the attention toward the breath, externalizing the focus can help with that. Just resting the attention on sounds to begin with and starting to build that practice of concentration and focused attention externally, and then gradually working toward, an internal process. But it's both great and scary to me that so many people are teaching mindfulness right now, because there are a lot of people that don't understand the nuances of teaching mindfulness in a trauma-sensitive way. And I try my best to do that. I'm certainly not perfect at it, but there are a lot of ways that people who experience anxiety related to mindfulness might be able to do it if they're working with a skilled practitioner who understands trauma-sensitive mindfulness. And it's a very gradual process of learning how to feel safe with being present in your own body. It's so gradual. It's not this thing that you can just instruct somebody
Right.
to do and they're going to get it and feel okay. And I think a lot of people are sort of getting re-traumatized by inexperienced teachers who are very well intentioned but don't really understand how to work with people with trauma. So
Right.
hopefully that news and those teachings will continue to spread out there. But
Yes, I love that idea. Well, I just think we're becoming such a more, hopefully, trauma-informed world.
yes.
In that people are starting to understand. As a matter of fact, I had my daughter's on spring break this week, and so she had some girlfriends yesterday. They were like, can you take us to the mall shopping and Chick-fil-A and, tropical smoothie? And I was like, sure. So we were driving along, I took the girls out for a little excursion, and there was a gentleman trying to cross the street, and he was just showing a lot of symptoms of just, that there was something off, and he was pacing a lot, and he was smoking a cigarette, but it was very nervous, and he was shaky, and he would step out in the road and then he would step back, and one of the kids, was like, what's up with that weird guy? And I said, I used to kind of have that same thought process, but then now I ask myself, oh my gosh, I wonder what's happened in his life.
Yeah.
Like, what has he experienced? And so I started talking to the girls about it and saying, that when we see people who are struggling like that, they've probably most likely been through something horrific in their life, and they are still trying to figure out how to get themselves through each day or each moment or whatever it is. And his was just crossing a street. And so I want us to be able to get to a world where we're all thinking that way, of like, at least if we can't help the person in that moment, at least send up a prayer or something, or at least acknowledge their story,
Right. In a compassionate way rather than in a judging way.
Yes.
People tend to judge what is unfamiliar and what scares them, and I love that that shift is starting to happen in a lot of communities, from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
Yes.
And I think my home city is Wilmington, North Carolina, and the whole county is developing a resiliency kind of focus. We have a resiliency task force, and we're looking at spreading this teaching of resiliency throughout the whole community and schools to healthcare professionals, because it's just rampant, that lack of understanding and judgment. And there's so much we can do as a society if we approach people and their struggles with compassion. So
yes, well, I mean, just the resiliency studies alone of, the impact of a teacher, the impact of, a coach. I know, the horrific trauma that I went through for my first 22 years of life, but yet I came out, people are like, how do you radiate such joy? Why are you always smiling? And you've been through such horrible, and I'm telling you, it was the resilience that I just had exposure to a grandmother that was very present in my life, that was extremely nurturing and loving and gentle, never yelled at me, just such a presence, and simple. I mean, what a simple way. And then I had a teacher who was very powerful, and again, just very gentle and very loving, and I needed that, which I think so many who are going through trauma to do, just that gentle presence of encouragement and love. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's such an impactful thing in terms of a brain standpoint. I mean, I'm not going to say anything that you don't know, but the brain has a negativity bias, and it has that negativity bias so that we can always stay focused on potential threats in order to survive. But when we've experienced significant real threats, like any kind of trauma, then that part of the brain kind of gets more activated more easily, and so it's going to be even this heightened awareness toward perceived threats. But that it's like the more we focus on perceived threats, the more the brain kind of wants to go there. And having someone nurturing in our lives who loves us unconditionally, or helps us to engage in the world with and connect with a sense of joy, it's like that starts to balance that negativity bias. And similarly, when we grow up and we're kind of locked into that perceived threat perspective, and our nervous systems are overly activated and in fight or flight, the way out of that, and this is what mindfulness teaches basically, is learning to recognize, what does my body feel like when I'm activated in that, fight or flight? And then B, what strategies can I use to calm down? One of the easiest ones is 4-6 breath. Breathe into the count of 4, breathe out to the count of 6. Or singing, and anything we do to elongate that exhale can activate the rest and repair system of the mode of the nervous system, and start to calm us down. But what also happens is then, it's really easy post-trauma to get locked into this negative perception, because our brains just get wired to that. And again, the way out of that is start to incline the mind towards something positive on a regular basis. Get up in the morning and name 3 things you're grateful for. When you get ready to go to bed, name 3 things that went well during the day. Just these small things can start to sort of create a new pathway in the brain toward positives, toward joy, toward the good in your world. And I hear a lot of people say, well, what's wrong with me? I'm always negative. And it's like, no, your brain has gotten wired that way for good reason, to try to save you. That's a good thing. But let's kind of, create some balance and start to rewire it in a different way. And it's, I know I went through a period of intense grief and trauma with my mom's addiction when I was in my mid-30s. And it's really easy to get caught in that loop of overwhelm and everything's difficult. And I remember during that phase, one of my yoga teachers said, for every moment that you're grieving, focus attention on joy. For every moment that you grieve, spend an equal moment experiencing joy. And I remember looking at her like, you've got to be out of your mind. Like, I've gone through 5 years of all these people in my life dying and my mom relapsing with addiction after 24 years. And where is joy? Where is the joy? But I really trusted this teacher. So I took it to heart and started bringing in that awareness of, okay, and started not only grieving more consciously, like choosing when I was going to allow myself to focus on grieving and processing feelings and writing about it or making photos about grief, and then choosing an equal amount of time to focus on cultivating joy. And I swear it turned things around for me. And what felt so impossible at the time has become one of the primary things that I teach people. And there's just so much research now that supports that philosophy about, how we can rewire our brain toward healing, toward joy, toward happiness, toward peace and contentment. It's just a matter of knowing how and then putting it into practice and setting up systems to remind ourselves to put it into practice. But it's life-changing.
Oh, for sure. As you were talking about, you first started saying rewiring, I was going to yell out, about brain plasticity. And just when I discovered that and realized, forever I told myself, I can't write this book. I can't write this book because, I'm still broken. And then I realized, well, one, I discovered brain plasticity and thought, oh my gosh, I don't have to continue in these same patterns and these same thought patterns and response patterns more than anything. And I could change my habits and change and rewire.
Yes.
And that's just, oh my gosh, you talk about offering hope to people.
Right. Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the research of Sonia Lyubomirsky, who's done a lot of research on happiness. And, on a similar note, she's looked at like what contributes to our happiness set point. And what she's determined is that it's 40% determined by genetics, 10%, this was shocking to me, 10% of our happiness set point is determined by our life circumstances. And that includes our any traumatic experiences that have happened, illnesses, socioeconomic status, education, loss. And then 40% of our happiness set point is determined by our intentional activity. And top of the list of intentional activity is mindfulness. And, the joke is a pessimist, a person who has a pessimistic kind of thinking style will look at those statistics and go, oh man, 40% genetics, I'm so screwed. Right. And an optimist will go, oh my gosh, 40% is determined by intentional activity. Like, we have agency over a lot of our happiness. And that too was kind of a game changer for me and personally and for my work.
Yeah.
So there,
how cool what caught my attention was that only that 10% is attributed to, the trauma story. And it goes back to, when people say to me, oh my gosh, Teri, how come you're always so smiley and radiating joy? And, you've been through all this horrible stuff and blah, 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 blah. And I would be like, for a long time, I don't know. I just focus on the positive and look for the good stuff. And that was it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I get curious too, like about, what is it that help some of us decide, I'm not going to feel this way. I'm not going to
Right.
be stuck here. And what is it that, leads to other people feeling so stuck? But I try as much as I can to educate people, like, no matter how badly you feel, there are things that you can do to feel better. And maybe the things about you and I are that we became utterly determined to figure out what some of those things were we could do, and we did them. But the beauty of it is, we're both out there, and there are other people out there who have had similar experiences, who are talking about these things and teaching people, here's one thing you can do, here's another thing you can do.
Right.
And my hope is that these kinds of conversations empower people to start trying some of these things, and learning that they too can feel better, no matter how awful it gets. I mean, I've been through a lot of difficult times in my life. I don't know why. I know people my age who've never experienced the loss of a loved one. And for some reason, I'm one of those people that I've known a lot of people who died, both personally and professionally. My best friend died when I was 5. I was in a horrible car accident when I was 6. So I had a lot of difficult things that led to a rocky start for me. But thankfully, I discovered meditation when I was in college. I think must have been 19. And so I've been practicing since then. And I don't want to think about what would my 20s have been like if I didn't have that practice. And but I love that, so many people, like even kids that I know now, are learning the practice. And it's hopefully going to be a game changer for a lot of people, a lot earlier than it was for me, and a lot earlier than it was for you. And I just think it's an exciting time to be doing this work.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think of my own kids. My oldest son, John, is 25, and he moved to Denver a little over a year ago. But I love when I talk to him on the phone, and he'll talk to me about these, just even his own awareness of his own, responses to things, and his, his anxiety or whatever it is, and how he's learning to deal with it, and how he's reading. And I was so not in touch with any of that when I was in my 20s. So kudos to you for finding meditation. And I hope, again, more youth and teens who struggle a lot, or start to find those resources. Yeah. Wonderful. So any myths or facts that you would like to clarify for listeners?
Yeah, probably the most common one is I hear people say, well, I tried meditation and I couldn't do it right. And, there's this belief that there's a right way to do it. And I think what people are imagining is that if, let's say they're practicing awareness of breathing, and we're focusing on the breath, or our awareness of sounds and focusing on sounds, and then the attention wanders and we bring it back. I think a lot of people believe that if the mind is wandering a lot, they're not doing it right, or they're not good at it, and they quit. And it's, the practice is not so much that you're able to hold your attention the whole time. The mind is going to wander because that's, minds are busy thinking. That's what they do. The practice is really about being able to be aware of building that awareness and noticing it when it wanders. And as soon as you notice it, just meet that with non-judgment and bring the attention back. And once people realize that, it's like, oh, there's no right way to do this. Maybe I can do this. But that's just the practice again and again and again for awareness of breathing, noticing when the attention wanders, bringing it back, noticing when the attention wanders, bringing it back.
Yes. And I love the concept of without judgment. I learned that in a guided meditation, on a phone app. I was doing a meditation, just sitting in my room, and the woman's very gentle and soothing voice, kept reminding me, if you've wandered, it's okay. Without, just bring your attention back to the breath, without judgment. And I just kind of remember looking at my phone, like I stopped for a second. I was like, without judgment. Well, that's a concept. That's cool. And now I do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, mindfulness is non-judgmental awareness. It's paying a particular kind of attention in a particular kind of way. I like to say mindfulness is awareness of the present moment without clinging to it when it's good, without trying to run away or turn away or escape it when it's difficult, and without wanting it to be otherwise. And, even if we never sat on a meditation cushion or in a chair to formally meditate, and we practiced meeting our everyday moments like with that attitude and that practice, it would be a game changer. That's the root of a lot of our suffering is, clinging to something when it's good. We take a bite of our favorite cookie. The first thought is usually, oh my gosh, this is so good. And then the second thought is usually, how can I get more? And for a lot of women, because we're so culturally conditioned, a lot of women then go, oh, but I shouldn't have it, but I want it, but I shouldn't have it. And then before you know it, it's like hands are empty. Where did the cookie go? I don't even remember eating it because I wasn't here. I got entangled in clinging to craving more and left the present moment. And then similarly, when difficulty arises, our human tendency is to feel overwhelmed by it and turn away from it, try to escape it. And that's where we get into trouble. We start turning toward eating too much, indulging in TV or internet, retail therapy, all these kind of compulsive things that we do to try to escape what's difficult. And, my favorite question is, does that bring you relief? And people are kind of stumped for a minute. And then one brave person in the room will say, well, yeah. And I'm like, yes, it does for a moment. And that's the difficulty of it. It's like, it does bring momentary relief. It activates that reward center in the brain. It makes the brain want to do more of that because it feels relieving. But in the long term, it often, whatever we're doing to escape, gets bigger because it's unattended to. And then whatever the behavior that we've done to try to escape often creates more suffering. So, can we practice being in the present moment? Practice trying to not cling, enjoy joy when it's here without clinging to it and leaving the present moment, facing our difficult moments head on, which is, it sounds simplistic, but again, there's a systematic way of building tolerance to difficult thoughts, difficult emotions, difficult experiences in a way that we don't have to keep turning away and trying to escape. And then can we stop wanting things to be otherwise and getting entangled in that and just meet whatever's here, acknowledge it, and then ask, is skillful action required here, or is there nothing I can do, and do I just need to practice acceptance? But just that everyday attempt can bring a lot of peace.
Yeah. Wow, you've taught me a lot in those past 3 minutes, because I've never really had it explained that way before, and that's brilliant. Gosh, I love it. What a great way to look at it. Yeah. Yeah, you got my mind like,
yeah, for my early years, I spent a lot of time focused on studying mindfulness and then meditating, but it took a long time before I really came to understand that a lot of, the formal meditation practice is just a training ground. It's an opportunity to kind of like have an up close and less distracted view of what our habitual mental patterns are. But a lot of the real magic of this practice comes when we take the practices and principles and apply them in our everyday lives. My brand, the name of my business is Everyday Mindful for that reason. It's like everyday mindfulness for me is where the magic happens. I still do a daily formal sitting practice, and that, again, helps me to stay in touch with that sense of home base. But throughout my day, I'm working my practice in an everyday kind of way, and how I interact with my thoughts, my feelings, my interactions with other people, and just trying to be more in the present moment, more moments.
yeah.
I'll never be perfect. I'm not a monk. I live or a nun. I live a very everyday kind of life. So I'm not, none of us are going to be perfect at this. No. But the effort certainly has a lot of rewards.
Yes. And it makes me think, what you're saying makes so much sense, because if you implement it along as you go along your day, and it does start to become a habit that I find myself very mindful all day long. I just find myself doing it and being very present to the beauty around me, or little things that make me smile, and because I've practiced it just throughout the day.
Yeah.
In a kind of off but similar kind of way, and this just popped into my head. My mom is very religious, like the most Catholic person I know, and she, has her ritual of making her cup of coffee, and then she says, I do my morning prayers, and she has her little prayer book, and then she'll be like, and then I did my afternoon prayers, and then I do my night prayers. And so like she has these prayers, and so she's like, do you pray? She's always on me, and I'm like, Mom, I pray throughout my day. Like I'll see a beautiful sunrise, and I'll be like, I'll just stop and say, oh my gosh, thanks God, but it's kind of embracing that mindfulness of just stopping in the moment.
Yes.
And just being appreciative of that gift. But yes, all part of that just mindfulness practice. That's my prayer.
Yes, and how beautiful. I mean, the great thing about this practice is you can blend it in with any spiritual belief or practice, or none. You can make it an integral part of your spiritual and religious beliefs and practices. And I love helping people of different religious faiths do that when they're interested. And you can also learn it as a secular practice. I teach the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, and that course was designed as a secular practice. And it's such a popular practice because it does exactly what you just described. It kind of starts people in a beginning spot, helping them understand how to practice, giving them practices to do, giving them homework assignments to do every day. And then, again, whatever we rest our attention on grows. So if we're resting our attention on expanding our awareness, that awareness by week 8 is just kind of astounding to watch people grow in that. I teach this practice in person in an 8-week course, and now I offer it in an online course, and do a lot of one-on-one coaching for people who are going through that course. And by about week 3, the people who are doing their homework are just like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to notice the beauty in my world, or I'm starting to pay more attention to the things I love about my partner, or, I'm finding things that I love about my work that I hadn't thought about in a long time. And just that awareness grows and grows and grows, and it's endless. There's not a destination that we arrive at in this practice. I've been practicing it for over 30 years, and it just keeps expanding and growing. And I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning. And for me, it's, it always provides interesting things for me, new, intellectual stimulation, spiritual growth, personal growth. And I love the way we can just keep growing in that practice. It's just that I've never experienced anything like that. And it's just really exciting to me.
Yeah, that is very exciting. One thing popped in my head, and then I'll ask you, how do people get in touch with you and connect with you if they, would like to do this with you? But the thing that popped in my head was, you said, there's not a destination. And I don't know why this just came to me, but, we're already at our destination. We're here in us. Like we're at our destination. It's just, as we become mindful, it's almost like we're opening up and we're shedding a light. We're letting that light in, or letting that light out.
Right.
Expanding that light. And then our destination, it just becomes, obvious to us that we're already here.
Right.
We're just allowing ourselves that opportunity to be present in it.
Right, exactly. And that, what we talked about earlier in terms of that non-judgmental awareness, the beauty of this practice is learning to turn that non-judgmental awareness toward ourselves, and then grow, developing acceptance of ourselves, growing into being able to be more compassionate towards ourselves and kinder. And a lot of us are really good at being kind to other people, but not so skilled at being kind to ourselves. And so that's another benefit of this practice, is that we learn to love ourselves more deeply, care for ourselves as though we were a beloved other. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to look at it. I know a friend of mine, this was years ago, was like, Teri, you have to go see this psychic. I have this psychic I see. And I was like, oh, I don't want to go see a psychic. And she was like, come on, because she convinced me. And I remember walking in the door to this gentleman, and he looked at me and he said, wow, you give out a tremendous amount of love. And he said, how come you don't accept it back? How come you don't bring it back to yourself? And I just burst out crying. Like, I was like, well, I don't know. Like, it's so touched a chord with me about just what you said. Yeah. Of not giving it back to myself or allowing it to come back to me. And so that was part of that healing process that I started on. Yeah. Very cool. So I have to ask you one of my favorite questions, just because it's so fun and I love the answer that I get from people. So if you could meet anyone, dead or alive, who could help you with your continued journey, either professionally or personally or both, who would it be?
I love that question. Probably Marion Woodman. And she was a Jungian analyst who practiced out of Toronto. And I actually did get to meet her a couple of times back in the 80s. So in the beginning of my journey toward healing and journey as in training as a psychotherapist, I attended several conferences where she spoke, and then I attended one small workshop that she did, and a lot of that workshop was about being embodied, getting grounded in our bodies. But I would really love to go back, 30 something years later and have a conversation with her. She did pass on, I think, like a year, and it was either last year or the year before. So that opportunity has passed, but she's one of the wisest people I know. And I just really have read every book she ever wrote, and attended every conference in my younger years that I could. And I will always be grateful for how her work affected me personally and shaped the beginning of my work as a therapist. And again, all about making peace with our bodies and being in our bodies and caring for our bodies in loving ways, which is, it's not something that we're culturally taught. And
Right.
certainly for those of us who have had either illness or trauma, it's an even greater challenge. And we're really, I think, being called more deeply these days to do that healing work than ever, just given the state of the earth. It's like, if we don't get this interdependent relationship we have with our bodies and the planet and start turning attention toward healing both the planet and our bodies, we're in trouble. I think we're kind of already a little in trouble, but I love that concept of focusing attention on that reciprocal relationship and seeing both our earth and our bodies as interdependent and both needing and deserving healing.
Yes, a beautiful way to look at it. So how do people get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, everydaymindful.com. And I'm on Facebook at Everyday Mindful, Twitter at Everyday Mindful, and Instagram at Meditate Create. My work on Facebook and Twitter is more geared toward the mindfulness. My work on Instagram is more a blend of photography and mindfulness. And the information about the 8-week MBSR course and how you can do one-on-one coaching with me is on the website as well. I coach clients all over the world, and I work with a lot of people like we're doing right now by video or phone. And yeah, I'm happy to hear from folks if this work sounds resonant or of interest.
Wonderful. And then anything else that you want to touch on before we end?
Just I'll go ahead and put out there. I'm working on 2 manuscripts. And yeah, I know we should talk about our book.
I know. Yes.
And seriously, let's do. And one is a memoir about my relationship with my mom and her struggle with addiction and a suicide attempt and her dying from cancer, and how her teaching me, like she just gave me the most beautiful gift of being in nature with me and teaching me how to connect deeply with nature. And it ended up being one of the primary things that helped me to heal from the chaos of her, or later her relapse in later life. So I'm working on that book, and then I'm working on another manuscript about the processes of mindfulness, yoga, creativity, and connection with nature that is more of an offering of teaching these practices that have been so instrumental in my own healing work. So look for those, hopefully,
Yeah.
very soon.
Yes, I know. I feel like I've been writing mine forever. But I keep hitting these stalls, and my mom, is has struggled with addiction my entire life. She quit drinking at 82. She's 83. She quit drinking at 82, went 10 months, and then fell off the wagon and fell hard. So yeah, these past couple of weeks have just been, I'm still battling my codependent relationship with her and trying to change that role that I have, because I was always the one to run in and save the day, her superhero to come in and clean up the mess. And I struggle with, like, I do go to Al-Anon meetings, and I just started like a year ago, but I so struggle with, like, oh, she's 83 years old. How do I let an 83-year-old, struggle so much? And, does it become elder abuse? Like, it's just very hard. How much do I let her fall on her face, literally and figuratively?
Yeah,
So
I
that
think
she can find her own healing path. And so when she was in the hospital, I will say, this last round, just a week, 10 days ago, my sister and I were with her, and I finally, was just like, I'd kind of reached my snapping point, and I said, Mom, you've got to start doing this healing work. What happened to you? What are you not? We knew some stuff, but I was like, just talk to us. I don't want to burden my children. I was like, Mom, please, you've got to just let it out. Well, she started talking, and I mean, she was quivering and shaking, but she started to tell some of these stories, and then I realized she really has some serious healing work to do. Here's this person who's carried this for 83 years, this horrific stuff and she said, I've never told anybody this. And so we're working with the Council on Aging to get her some geriatric counseling, and get her some professional help beyond just, dumping it out, which is always good to finally get it out of you, but to finally start that healing journey. So
wow, good for you. And I love what you said. Like I think it is a whole different ball game. And I know we all do the best we can in the moment, and that whole movement around codependency that started around the 80s was really super valuable to me as a young adult who'd had an addicted mom as a teenager. And my mom stayed sober for 24 years, and then her relapse got triggered by a prescription for OxyContin post-surgery. And the thing that I found is, she was aging as well. And the rules that I'd learned, we had done a lot of healing work together and found a really kind place of acceptance toward each other in our relationship. And everything changed when she relapsed. And, the rules, I decided that all the rules of codependency that I'd learned, a lot of them didn't apply anymore, because she was aging and she was needing a different kind of care. She was needing the typical caretaking that an aging parent, an unwell parent needs, and she was addicted. And I chose, to kind of put what I knew about codependency aside and go and just ask myself, what does my aging mother need from
oh,
me?
you're making me well up with tears, because yes.
Well, you did the same thing. Like you didn't language it that way, but that's what you did. And I think, I don't know, I question lately I work with a number of clients whose young adult kids are addicted to opioids. And I just think we may need, and I don't know what that framework is, but I think we're at a point that we may need a different framework, because for how we as family members relate to an addicted other, because the patterns of addiction have changed, the substances have changed, the access has changed, and we're kind of at this critical point. Like, we need new paradigms for how we deal with addiction in families. The old ones just don't apply on so many levels, and it can be so overwhelming to say, well, I don't want to be codependent. And I tell my clients, like, don't confuse codependence with loving your family member and taking action to try to help them. It's almost like that codependent movement wiped out the concept of love.
Yes, that is my philosophy. I'm that person that puts, all my stuff out on Facebook. I write the novel and so my journey with my mom has been out there for so many people to see and be a part of. And the response has been overwhelmingly positive, of like people reaching out privately to me and saying, oh my gosh, thank you. You helped me along my journey. And I had a point that I was going to give, and now it's gone out my head. But, yeah, I think I lost it. Dude. I think I was gonna compliment you on something. Oh, you were talking about love. Yeah, there, I came back. So yeah, the whole love thing, and that's part of what I put about my mom, is that, I do find it so difficult. I now know I'm not her savior. I'm a fixer by nature, but I can't fix this for her. But I've had those conversations with my mom, and I think that's part of it, is that I'm like, Mom, I love you so much. I love you so much, but I can't fix this for you. You are the one that has to go back into those dark places and do your healing work. And then I promise I'll have my hand there and I'll hold your hand, but I can't do it for you. So that's where that love piece, that at least I've done with my personal journey.
Yeah.
Mom.
Yeah.
I can't just abandon her. I just can't do it. It's not, I even wrote that on Facebook. I was like, it's not in me.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, and when they're in the active throes of addiction, I mean, I can remember a period that my mom would call me every day, just wasted on opioids and benzodiazepines and mixing that with alcohol. And, it was one of the hardest things, but it's like, you can't reason with an impaired person. Right. And I'd say, Mom, I love you. Call me when you're sober. And I'd hang up. And it was so hard, and I'd talk with her when she was sober and say, I'm willing to do anything to get you help. Like, I'll make the phone calls, but you have to be willing to receive the help. And I'll come up there. I'll drive you anywhere to rehab. And in that phase, she just utterly refused, and she ended up overdosing and then shooting herself. And it was just so traumatic. And thankfully, she did have a couple of years after that of living a sober life and being really committed to loving herself and living. But unfortunately, within several years, she was diagnosed with lung cancer and died a year later. And it was just it was such a tragic ending for someone. I remember at one point she said to me, I don't understand. I've really finally decided that I really want to live, and now I'm going to die. And there's so many layers of complexities with these prescription medications that are readily accessible. And it's just, I don't know. It's tragic. I hear stories.
It is tragic. Yes.
Every day about, and I just think the middle class aging person's addiction journey is really underestimated, misunderstood, and not really, there are not a lot of conversations about that. So I find it interesting that, we're in conversation about that kind of shared journey. And I hope that our conversation gives more people, and your conversation on Facebook and my conversations on Facebook give more and more people permission and encouragement to start having those conversations about their experience. Because my goodness, people are still so locked in shame about this and not talking about it. And that's
Right.
one of the most painful parts as a family member, is feeling isolated. And I tell people, you can't throw a rock anywhere these days and not hit somebody whose family is affected by addiction, and they're all around you. You don't know it. Like, I can be in the room and know 3 people are struggling with that with their families, and they all think they're the only one because they're not talking about it.
Right. Right.
So many.
Yeah. I had a cousin-in-law recently, put out, and she, said, and she gets my newsletters, and she's giving me such great response back about, finding her voice. And she finally did it. She put out this massive post about her son's addiction and talked about, her spiritual journey with it, and her, just the emotional journey and so forth. And she always said, I've been so afraid of the response I would get. And the responses were like, I read every single one of them because I was so proud of her, number one. But I was so moved by how many people were like, oh my God, me too. Or, and it just opened these floodgates, and it was beautiful on a sad level, but beautiful nonetheless.
Right.
Because there's just such power and empowerment in connection. And when you can find people, kind of like the hashtag Me Too movement, is women found one another, and there's just that sense of empowerment that happens from that. So, yeah.
Sharing our stories I'm continually astounded by the healing power of sharing our stories.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. For ourselves as well as, others, as we allow them the opportunity to share theirs, or at least, nod along. Yeah. Well, it has been an absolute joy to have you here. I'm sure we could talk for a few more hours. I know we didn't even get to all the questions, but
okay.
Yeah.
I loved our conversation, Teri. Thank you so much. And let's do talk offline about our books.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to do a quick little closeout here, and then I'll hit stop record, and we'll chat for a second. So everyone, thank you for joining us on the Healing Place podcast. And until next time, remember, be gentle with yourselves. Thanks. Bye-bye.